Frost & Company have been busy bringing in high-caliber talent from the portal to help make an immediate impact next season. Let's take a look at some guys who are already in the program and who are set to make an impact themselves. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 33 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska football podcast where we cover the Huskers season and team news as it progresses throughout the year. If you enjoy the content, please consider leaving a like and following it. I really appreciate it and helps me reach more ears. First, we're going to get into transfer news. We have another defensive lineman leaving the program. Jordan Riley enters the transfer portal. He was a reserve player for that defensive line for the past 2 seasons, and although he didn't have the most outstanding stat line, he did provide depth and experience to that position. And with losing Damian Daniels, Ben Stilley, DeAndre Thomas, you're losing a lot already. So you were hoping not to lose any more, but he's in the transfer portal now. I thought that we had another guy coming in that would be coming in this fall. I can't seem to find the article anymore, so maybe that was just, kind of hearsay. But if we hear any more on the transfer portal and if Jordan Riley does actually find a place to land, then we will get back into that. Otherwise, in other news, we have Huskers that earned combine invites this week. So you have Austin Allen and Cam Jurgens both earned invites to Indianapolis. Austin Allen has been overlooked thus far, despite being the Big Ten tight end of the year. He had strong performance, although a strong performance at the combine could bring his draft stock up quite a bit. He's got the size and the hands. Obviously, we've seen that on display all season last year. But a good time in the 40 could put him in elite company as far as that goes. If you look at Gronkowski and Kelsey, they both ran sub 4.7s at the 40. So if he could get his speed, and he is pretty quick. We've seen that show up in the game. So if he's able to run a good 40 time, I can imagine that his draft stock will go up exponentially from there. You have Cam Jurgens as well. He's still kind of an experimental pick at this point. He has athleticism is obviously off the charts for a center, but the lack of experience at that position, he was only there. He switched to center when he came to Nebraska, so the lack of experience will bring his draft stock down. But that also means that there's a higher ceiling for him. There's more room for growth from that perspective. He hasn't been in this position for a long time, so you kind of look at him and you know what you're going to get. You don't know what he could potentially grow into. So again, a strong performance at the center spot at the combine could make more teams start talking about him. They're going to join Cam Taylor-Britt and JoJo Doman at the combine, while we still wait to see if guys like Samori Toure and Damian Daniels will pick up invites themselves. In other Husker news, it seems like Casey Thompson is making the most out of his time in Lincoln to bond with the offensive line. It sounds like he took the entire offensive line group out to steaks and bowling on Saturday. Just picture the bill at 14 300-pound linemen coming in to eat steaks. So he's obviously taken a hit to the wallet, but he is trying to set a great tone and build the chemistry with those guys. Those are the guys that are going to be protecting you in games. You're going to rely on them quite a bit this season. So it's a good idea to get a relationship going with those guys and build that chemistry with them. So it sounds like he's doing the best he can to start that process. And other Big Ten news, so it sounds like the conference is considering making a couple big changes starting as early as the 2023 season. They sound like this is a pretty for sure thing going to happen. Sounds like they're going to do away with the divisions. There's going to be no more East and West divisions for the Big Ten. The top 2 teams in the Big Ten every year will play for that championship. So I think for those at the bottom, I mean, consider like Northwestern or Iowa's that go 7-3 or 8-2. For them, it's not so great. You have to almost go undefeated, but it's going to be a harder road to the championship for those guys at the bottom. But for the overall strength of the conference, especially with the college football playoffs, it makes total sense. I think that their conference schedule will be more balanced. Sounds like they're going to split it up into pods, similar to how the SEC sounds like they're going to do theirs. So Nebraska's potential pod would be like Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Minnesota. You'll play those same teams every year, and then you'll have a rotating. The pods will just kind of play, against each other. But there's going to be no more West and East divisions, so the top 2 teams will play every year. The best teams from the Big Ten will play for that championship, which whoever gets to the top then had to, go through fire to get there, so they will be tougher because of that. They'll earn it more, and then in the eyes of the college football playoffs, then you will have that more notable win under your belt as well. So the second big change that could be possibly heading down the pipeline, it sounds like they might be going down to an 8 conference game schedule, similar to how the SEC does it as well, while adding an ACC and a Pac-12 game every year. I like the idea of going down to conference, 8 conference games. I also like the idea of playing Miami, Colorado, or Florida State once in a while. Oregon's in there as well. Going down to the 8 conference games, like I said, puts us on the same level as the SEC. So a lot of people are saying that the SEC doesn't play as many hard games. So then that's how they get in the playoffs so often. Well, we would be in that same boat then. So we will be playing the 8 games. Although I do think that the losses will be more impactful at that 8-game range. It's harder to climb back from a loss. 9-1 looks certainly better than 7-1 does. So, I think it would even the playing field across all of the conferences at that point, and it would be, an easier schedule. You're still playing teams that could be potentially good coming from the Pac-12 and the ACC, but it certainly wouldn't be like a Big 12 grind for 10 games. Now, so to get into the story, so this is going to be the topic we talk about. So who will level up their game from the last season and finally have a breakout year for the Huskers? I only included returning Huskers on the list so that we can compare their performance to last year. The list is filled with players that have shown sparks throughout their career but haven't quite hit their potential yet. The 2022 season is shaping up to create a lot of great opportunities for guys to kind of step up and kind of realize that potential. So these are 6 players that will finally have breakout years at Nebraska. Number 1, or backwards on the list, number 6 will be Ty Robinson. So Ty Robinson hasn't lived up to his potential thus far. It isn't a lack of effort. It seems like he puts it out on the field every time. He just hasn't been able to, kind of make it click. He has a constant motor and drive that you can see when you watch him play. With Damian Daniels, Ben Stilley, and DeAndre Thomas all leaving, that's going to give him a great opportunity to kind of showcase his growth and experience that he's had over the past couple of years. So whether he starts at nose tackle or defensive end, he'll have a chance to hit big numbers. I almost expect him to start at that defensive end position. It sounds like Nash Hutmacher is going to take the nose tackle if he can. So that'll free up Ty Robinson to stay at that defensive end position that he has been playing. The last season, he has had 27 tackles with 2 sacks, or last season, he had 27 tackles with 2 sacks. That's already more sacks than Daniels, Stilley, or Thomas, and that was only with 4 starts. So everything sets up for him this year to excel and to get into the backfield and be disruptive and cause more sacks and turnovers and things like that. I think you could see him up there with more solid names in the Big Ten, such as Boye Mafe from Minnesota or George Karlaftis from Purdue. Those are pretty elite tier guys. So if he's able to get up to that level, that will obviously be an improvement from what he had last season. I could see him in that mid 30 tackle range. He was already close to that with 27 last season. And especially if Nelson can get his game up as well, you could see him hitting, doubling, or tripling his sack numbers. You could see him jump from 2 sacks to 5, 6, 7 sacks in the season. So talking about Garrett Nelson, he's number 5. So Garrett Nelson ended the season with 57 total tackles, 25 solo tackles, 5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. That's not good enough for what he wants to accomplish. If you've listened to him talk, he wants to be an elite pass rusher. He wants to be a dominant guy on that defense. He strives to be that elite pass rusher that he talks about. And with another year of experience under his belt and with JoJo Domann kind of stepping out of the picture, we're no longer going to be running that nickel as effectively as we have been. So I think that you're going to see a lot more Garrett Nelson packages where it's just a power rush to the quarterback. So he's well known to be one of the most intense guys in that locker room. The quote going around is that he has unmatched work ethic with a bit of crazy. So you can see the work ethic if you go through GPS tech that the Huskers use in practice show Nelson's motor. The coaches have talked about the GPS technology that they use and how that kind of shows what you think you do in practice versus what you're actually doing. And Garrett Nelson, it shows when he stops, when he starts, and most importantly, when he hits something. They call that a load. Nelson's loads were constantly at the top of the defensive players. So he's constantly at the top there. His what he thinks he's doing is actually what he's able to do in practice. And on the crazy side of that, so he had that little bit of crazy. Look back to the 2020 season when he knocked out those 2 bottom teeth. I believe it was against Penn State. People didn't even know about it. He didn't leave the game. He didn't throw a fit about it. In fact, he was kind of poking fun at it when he was finally asked about missing those bottom 2 teeth. He said it's kind of fun trying to fit a straw in there. He is a football guy. He is passionate about this game. He said he would play in the parking lot every day if he had to. So with Domann gone, like I mentioned, he will have the opportunity to showcase his skills more often. And while he isn't as versatile as Domann was more of a perfect nickel. This guy's built for the pass rush, as I mentioned before. News regarding Nelson has been fairly quiet this offseason. I haven't been able to find a lot of how he's improving, how he's looking off the field. But I suspect that his passion and his love of the game and his work ethic are keeping him very busy. He will be honing his game and learning new skills to add to the arsenal to get back into that backfield. So while I'm sure he'll up his total tackle numbers, he would really like to double the sack that he had. As I mentioned, he had the 5 sacks at the end of last season. He wants to be up there with the elites. So he wants to be anywhere from that 10 to 15 category. And that would be, good for him. I do feel like he's going to be able to get back to the quarterback more often this season, especially look back to the Ohio State game when he was able to strip, sack, fumble Ohio State's quarterback. It's completely escaping my brain right now, but he was able to get back there, and I think just getting that taste and what it took to get there, he's going to be able to recreate that a lot more this next season. Getting into number 4 of players who will level up their game, you have Jaquez Yant. So some issues kept him from being on the field for substantial amounts of time last season, whether it be the weight issues or the lack of the playbook knowledge. So you didn't see him for a few games, and Coach Frost had made a comment that he was up in his weight too high. He told him that he wasn't going to play him if he was above 235, I think it was. And he came back from the summer and he was 245 or something like that. So judging from the winter conditioning pictures, that's not going to be an issue this year. He seems to be in excellent physical condition. He looks to be in really good, strong conditioning. So hopefully with that extra year in the program, he'll also have the playbook down, whether that be changing a lot under Whipple. I assume that he's going to be more, dedicated and focused on getting that playbook down because he doesn't want to sit on the bench as much as he did last season. That was just, I'm guessing that was a gut check to him that you got to take this seriously. So hopefully with that extra year, he'll have that down. There's a good chance that a healthy Gabe Urban could beat him out for that running back 2 position, but Urban will still be rehabbing that nasty knee injury that he had. And I'm betting that Yant, at least early on in the season, will be primed to grab that spot. I'm also kind of going off the assumption that the offensive line is going to be improved from last season. It doesn't have to be a ton. It just has to be noticeable. But I'm going off the assumption that could happen. It isn't guaranteed, but if that is the case, that doubly impacts Yant's success. Whipple won't need to rely on the option as much this year to get the ball past the line of scrimmage. We kind of had to scheme the option a lot more last season than I think we would have liked because the offensive line couldn't be trusted to run it through the tackles. So if they are able to hold, we can run that more traditional through the tackle approach, and which plays to Yant's size a little better. I think Yant's size, he's not as shifty as those guys that can run around the outside. And he doesn't quite have that top speed. But to run that guy through the tackles, he is a monster. And then so his size is better suited to that. On the second side of that, so if the offensive line is able to hold, that can also bring the passing game into the picture. So if the passing game is able to get established as well, they're able to stretch the field, which takes guys out of the box, which in turn helps the running game get established and stay successful as well. So last year for stat line, Yant had 47 carries, 294 yards with a 6.3 yard per carry average and 1 touchdown. Pitt had 3 running backs last season go for over 100 carries, and all of them hit over 500 yards. They all combined for 15 touchdowns as well. So, he would gladly take the 100 carries and run with it, especially if he's able to run through the tackles with it. I can easily see Yant's numbers double across the board, whether that be carries, yards, touchdowns. He's going to be a guy you want to see in the red zone specifically. But if the offensive line is able to do anything better than they were last year, hopefully they establish this run game. So I expect Jaquez Yant will have a good season because of that. Looking at number 3, you have Travis Vocalic. So with Austin Allen off to dominate the NFL at 6'9", Vocalic takes over as the big man on offense. He is 6'6", 260 pounds, and he ended the 2021 season with 11 receptions, 127 yards, and 0 touchdowns. So Vocalic's hands seemed sure when he did get thrown the ball. He seemed to make the most out of the opportunities when he was targeted. And like I've said so many times before, how many times did we see receivers or tight ends streaking across the field and they just weren't able to get the ball thrown to them, whether that be for the offensive line or Adrian just not having the field awareness. They weren't able to get the ball to him as much. I don't think that you're going to have that same issue with Mark Whipple as the offensive coordinator. And if you go back to the offensive preview video that I did, if you haven't seen that already, I'd go back and watch that. The tight ends were criminally underutilized last season, especially in the red zone. You did not see Austin Allen, your big target. You didn't see him in the red zone as much as you would have liked. And so Austin Allen's numbers were good. They were the best tight end that we've had, at Nebraska, but they weren't nearly as good as they could have been. So I don't think, again, you're going to see Whipple make that same mistake. He has big guys that he can use in the red zone. Yant, Travis vocalic, you're going to use those big guys in the red zone. So Pitt's top tight end last season, he has the identical frame to Travis vocalic. He's 6'6", 260 pounds. He ended the season with 38 receptions, 451 yards, and 6 total touchdowns. Even their second tight end of the year, he had 28 receptions, 326 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Either one of those lines, you're going to be willing to take. That second tight end that I mentioned, he's more of a Thomas Fidone size, slightly smaller, but either way, you have a big tight end. They're going to be utilized in that passing game, especially in the red zone. So I expect that you'll be able to see Travis vocalic hit that 30 reception mark and probably going for over 300 yards with at least 4 touchdowns. It's completely capable of doing that. So that his stat line is going to be so much better than it was last season, and I expect to see that. Before we get to the final 2 players, let's talk about some notable mentions that almost made the list. So you could really take any of the offensive line here and throw them in there, whether that be Nuri Nwili, Teddy Prohaska, Turner Corcoran, or Ezra Miller. I think any one of those guys could be on the list. It's just kind of hard to judge a breakout year for an offensive lineman. They don't really have stats to back up that breakout status. So any one of them could have been named here. And I assume that all of these guys will improve from where they were last year. And if they can improve even slightly, that's already going to be a breakout year for the offensive line. So I think the offensive line is really hard to judge an individual's progress, but you could throw any one of those guys on there. Also, I mentioned Thomas Fidone. So all of the reasons that vocalic will be successful this next season, they all apply to Thomas Fidone as well. So he's more athletic. It sounds like he doesn't have quite the size that Travis vocalic does, but I think that, as I mentioned in the offensive preview again, that I think that he could start later in the year. I think Travis is almost guaranteed to get that spot this first few games. But vocalic will get his time to shine. If Thomas Fidone can also step up there, you will see him as well. Both of those guys could have huge numbers next year. You also could have added Gabe Urban Jr. to the list. So he could easily be in place of Yant at that running back 2 position. The injury has me a little bit wary of adding him to the list. Like I mentioned, he still has every capability of grabbing that running back 2 spot if he's healthy and able to run. I just played the odds here, and I think a healthy Yant probably gets that spot over Gabe Urban Jr. That also allows, Gabe to kind of rehab that, kind of get back in the rhythm of things, and he could break out midseason as well. So no saying he can't do that. You have a defensive guy that almost made the list. He was probably the closest to making the list. You have Quentin Newsom. I think that he's set to have a big year this year. That defensive back room overall is going to be a very intense competition this spring and fall. As a young guy last season, he got tested quite a bit, and trial by fire, he kind of made it through that. That doesn't end here. So he's going to be going through another trial by fire this offseason where he has to develop against these wide receivers that Mickey Joseph is going to be raising their level of skill as well. Cam Taylor-Britt is gone, so he's going to have to step up and kind of be that new voice for the cornerback room. But as I mentioned, Mickey Joseph is bringing in all these talented wide receivers, so that defensive back room that's already going to have an intense competition this offseason, they're going to have great matchups in practice, which is only going to drive, the competition between those guys and bring out the best of every player. So iron sharpens iron, and I think that Quentin Newsom is going to step up his game and elevate his game, and I think that he could easily be on the list as well. You have the 2 linebackers, Luke Reimer and Nick Henrich. Also, I want to make a note. Every time I've mentioned Luke Reimer, I say Reimers, and I don't correct myself. I went to school with a bunch of Reimers. That's just a kind of a slip of the tongue thing. But you have Luke Reimer and Nick Henrich. They didn't make the list simply because they already had stellar years last season. So it's going to be hard for them to have a market improvement from that in 2022. But they could both have outstanding years again. It just wouldn't be as impressive as a leap as some of the other names on the list. So now on to the 2 players that are set to level up their games and have finally have a breakout year in the 2022 season. As mentioned, if you enjoy the video, please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy the content like this to continue seeing it. So the last 2 guys are kind of, a 1A, 1-2, 1A, 1B situation. 2 different guys. These will be 2 and 1. They're interchangeable. Either one could go. You have Omar Manning and Xavier Betts. They will both be in the same situation, and they will both improve as receivers under Coach Joseph. Casey Thompson is going to be a great addition for these guys for this reason. He's great at running through progressions. So that's going to impact the wide receivers. That's going to impact that tight end zone as well. You're not going to see so many guys running wide open without getting the ball to them. Casey Thompson's able to get the ball out quick. He's able to find guys that are open, and he seems to run through his progressions very quickly and effectively. So if they're open, they're going to get the ball thrown to them. That alone is already going to set these guys up, because there was multiple opportunities where specifically Omar Manning would be running a route that Samori Toure had just made a big play on, a series or two ago, and he just didn't get thrown the ball. That could, again, be because of the offensive line collapsing, or Adrian having to run for his life, or Adrian just not seeing him. But I don't think you're going to have that many missed opportunities as you had last season because of that. That already sets these guys up. They are going to have more opportunities as a downfield receiver as well, with Toure off to the draft. So both capable of stretching out defenses as Toure did, but they're going to do it in different ways. So you look at Manning, he had some obstacles. He had a lot of mental obstacles coming into last season, even the season before that, but he seems to have overcome those, and he saw playing time substantially last season. Late in the season, we've seen time and time again his frame play well into his hands. He does fight for extra yards, and he was there for those big time crucial catches. When you needed some guy to get open, it seemed like Omar Manning was able to use his size and come down with that first down catch. He's 6'4", 225 pounds, so that size and physicality are going to be a huge factor in his success next season. He ended last season with 26 receptions for 380 yards. That's a 14.6 yard average and 2 touchdowns. Now we're going to flip over to Betts. He battled staying healthy last season. I assume that's why we didn't see him as much. They didn't really, they said he's kind of tending to these wounds or whatever, but they didn't specifically name what they were. But it impacted his playing time regardless. He's lanky at 6'2", 200 pounds, but he does have that top end speed to be a downfield threat. I expect that we will see him more still in special packages in the run game, but I think you're going to see him more as a wide receiver. More than anything, his speed will be utilized to his advantage, especially on that outside. I think that they're going to streak him. He will be a downfield threat for sure. Last season, he had 20 receptions, 286 yards, 14.3 yard average with 0 touchdowns. He did have that 83-yard rushing touchdown, as I mentioned, against Northwestern, but I think he's still going to be utilized for that reason. He cannot be caught off guard. Those jet sweeps with Xavier Betts are just too good to miss out on. I just expect you to see more of an impact on the wide receiver group. My expectation for both of these guys is that their stat lines would probably double next season. Whipple is great at utilizing different strengths, whether it's top speed or that purely physical receiver that Omar Manning is. If you look at his time at Pitt last season, his top 2 receivers, they combined for nearly 150 receptions, 2,200 yards, and 23 touchdowns. You look at Jordan Addison, he's a Blitnikoff winner, which is the wide receiver, best wide receiver in the country. He's lanky but explosive. He has explosive speed, and he is an outside threat. That's comparable to Betts. Then you look at Jared Wayne, who was number 2 receiver. He was physical, and he came down with many of the contested thrown balls to him. Those 50-50 balls, you just want it more than that defensive back, and that's kind of the Omar Manning frame. So I'm not so drunk on Kool-Aid that I think we're going to be hitting those 2021 Pitt numbers, but especially with Coach Joseph getting these receivers ready on top of the offensive, opportunities that Mark Whipple's going to give these guys. And as I mentioned with Quentin Newsom, these defensive back and wide receiver matchups are only going to drive that competition, and that trial by fire is going to only harden these guys into better wide receivers. So for the same reason, I think it's going to impact the defensive backs this offseason. I think it's also going to sharpen all these wide receivers. They have an intense competition themselves to get on the field. So I think that these two guys could easily combine for 100 receptions and 1,500 plus yards, and probably around 15 touchdowns between the two of them as well. So that's going to be probably the largest leap you're going to see, is these receivers between Coach Joseph being able to hone their skill set and then Mark Whipple being able to take advantage of that newly acquired skill set. I think you're going to see these two guys shine more so than maybe most of the other names on the list. So what do you guys think? Is there a name that you think should be on the list that wasn't? Do you think there's a name that was on the list that you think shouldn't have been? Do you think that all of my picks are Kool-Aid induced at this point? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I'm always open to topic recommendations. I've had a few people reach out saying that I should do, certain videos on certain topics. I'm always open to those. It helps me come up with more ideas. It gets my brain going. So you can either leave those in the comments below or find me on Twitter at Cobsmacked Pod. But until next time, go Big Red.